maybe it's likely it was him. So then Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked him, well then what was his destination? And Prabhupada apparently said, he's preaching in the heavenly planets. So that was the end of the Vishnu Jain story. But it does seem that, you know, he had some problem, and then he had read this story about Chota Haridas, and he took it so seriously that he actually did it. And Prabhupada said, well, if he has committed suicide, that's a good thing. It shows that he's serious, and therefore he'll get, you know, Lord Chaitanya's mercy again. Anyway, so getting the mercy of the Guru is very important. Without it, it's very difficult to get association with Krishna. You can't just walk into the Prime Minister of Sweden's office, or maybe you can here, I don't know, but in other places you can't just walk into the Prime Minister or the President's office, you know, unless you've got a connection. They have so many associates, they have so many staff, and unless you make an appointment, you can't get in. So the same way with spiritual life, we can't just saunter into Krishna's association, oh, let me go to Vrindavan or Mayapur and sit down and chant. Yeah, you have to get your linkage. You've got to get your invite. You've got to get permission to, you know, approach the Supreme Lord, and that comes through the Parampara system and through the Guru. So in that way, then we rely on the Guru for everything. That's our connection. So that's where we get that mercy, and that's where that association, you know, becomes very potent and powerful. So a few weeks later, about a month later after that 2 weeks after that conversation, Prabhupada was in Delhi. After Mayapur festival, we went to Calcutta for a few days. We visited Radha Govinda Mandir, where Prabhupada was brought up. Saw the deities there, that was very nice. And then we flew over to Delhi, and before the Vrindavan leg of the festival, there was a couple of pandals. One had been set up in Delhi, there was another one at Modi Nagar, and there was another one at Aligarh. So in Delhi, we were staying at the house of this man, Mr. Lakshman Agarwal. In those days, there was a light bulb company called Sylvania Lakshman. He owned that company. And he had a big house in Chanakyapuri. So he, I think previously he'd had some connection with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada has stayed at his house. So again, in 1976, we stayed there for a few days. And outside his front, you know, gate, there was a grassy area. So he set a pandal up. And Prabhupada obliged him to preach to his neighbours mainly. It wasn't like a big affair, but they wanted to encourage this man. So, as per normal, in the mornings, Prabhupada would get up and go for his morning walk. You know, at least the streets were a little bit quiet at that time. As we were walking, because Pushta Krishna Swami had just come on as Prabhupada's new secretary, we were having a debate about just how much independence an ordinary soul actually has. And it's still something I hear devotees debating, how much independence and choice do we actually have. We're bound up, you know, by our destiny, by our karma, or whatever it is. So what choices do you really have? Is there any independence or not? So Pushta Krishna Maharaj pursued the point. If a person is habituated to smoking, he asked, is he free in that activity, or has he surrendered his freedom? Prabhupada said that it's like a person who smokes despite the government printing a warning on the box. One is free to do it, but he's not freed from the results. Therefore, a living entity has minute, but not absolute independence. It's like a child who is free to play, but as soon as he does something wrong, his father is there to correct him. Pushta Krishna Swami took it a little further, wanting more clarification. He said, well, this idea of freedom and independence, is it possible that for anyone theoretically to surrender to Krishna at any time? Prabhupada said, yes. Well, okay, so then let's say someone is in a very degraded condition of life, modes of ignorance and passion. His mind is always disturbed. in surrendering to Krishna, is it possible that it can be independent even of the mind? Prabhupada told him, you're independent of the mind always. It is your mind. You are not the mind. Then you're independent of the mind always. Well, so then even a person merged in the mode of ignorance can by some good fortune surrender to Krishna? It's a good question. You know, all right, you say you have a little independence, but people that are completely covered over in mode of ignorance, you know, where is their independence? They're just shrouded in ignorance. They can't make any proper decisions on their own. So Prabhupada, so he's asking, is that just some good fortune or what? So Prabhupada says, no, not good fortune. Not good fortune. Krishna says, you do it. Here, immediately you become fortunate. So there's no question of waiting for becoming fortunate. You can become fortunate immediately. Suppose if I say, here's this bag, $100,000. You can take it, and immediately you'll become a rich man. So why don't you take it? So understanding Prabhupada's point that even good fortune is dependent on the mercy of the Lord, Gurudas asked, how does Kripa Siddhi work? So Prabhupada's reaction took us all by surprise. Kripa Siddhi means that you're not willing to take this bag of money, and I say, take it, take it, take it. And he suddenly turned and very vigorously started pushing Gurudas in his stomach as if he was giving him the imaginary bag of money. Take it, Gurudas. So everybody broke out laughing. Gurudas Maharaj was simultaneously astonished and delighted at the sudden abrogation of the formal guru-disciple relationship. Prabhupada continued the mimicry and the pushing also. He feigned resistance. No. And then he began pushing again. So I said, this is Kripa Siddhi. Even if you're unwilling, I give it to you in your pocket and push it. That is Kripa Siddhi. So there's nothing dry in Prabhupada's expression of philosophy. He makes the philosophy become alive because he lives it himself. In so doing, he attracts us to use our little independence to surrender to his lotus feet. So Gurudas mentioned that since we see everybody in the world as potential devotees, we should also serve them so that they can become devotees. But Prabhupada clarified the distinction between showing mercy and giving service, serving others. He said that is not service. He said that is mercy. It's an important point because the Mayavadi's philosophy is, you know, service to man is service to God, we're all serving each other, blah, blah, blah. But Prabhupada said, no, that's not service, it is mercy. He explained that although a devotee has a mood of service, Vaishnava philosophy is that we serve the higher devotees and show mercy to the lower ones. He said the popular Mayavadi idea that we should serve everyone is wrong. This puzzled me because it says in Shastra that the most advanced devotee sees himself as being the lowest of all. So I asked that if that is so, then where is the question of an advanced devotee showing mercy to somebody who he sees as lower, because he already thinks himself to be the lowest? Prabhupada replied that an advanced devotee does not see anybody as lower than himself, but his mood is one of sympathy. Oh, here is a person, he can become a devotee, let me raise him up to the standard. So he concluded, it is a duty. It does not mean that he's thinking, I am higher. No. So Pushpa Krishna said, well then in other words, he doesn't consider that he's advanced and therefore he's showing mercy to somebody lower. Prabhupada affirmed that. Yes, he's always thinking, I am lower than a woman, but Lord Krishna wants it, so let me do some service, that's all. So his comments made it clear that it was simply a question of offering assistance to help another to advance. Prabhupada illustrated his point through another comical exchange with Gurudas. Therefore, he said, we say, Prabhu. Prabhu means, you are my master. Please order me. What can I do for you? That should be the attitude. Not, Gurudas Prabhu, please come here and brush my shoes. So, we all laughed again, perhaps recognizing something of ourselves in the parody as he continued. So what kind of Prabhu? he should say, Gurudas Prabhu, can I brush your shoes? That is a real Vaishnava. So the point in this conversation, of course, is that we have that little bit of independence, and against all odds, seemingly, if we might meet the right person, we can actually surrender. It doesn't matter what our current covering, of ignorance and passion is. As an example, I'll give two examples. Our Sydney temple in North Sydney, it's just next to the Bhakti house. Did you join there?
Yes.
Yes. So up the road there's a place called Neutral Bay. It's just like, half a mile or something. And it's a very expensive, exclusive shopping area. And there was this guy there, he was a bum. And he used to hang around the shopping centre all day. And he was filthy dirty. He would sit on the benches and he would pass stool and urine in his own clothing and never bother to clean himself. So he actually, really stank. And he was filthy, grimy, his hair was really long and covered over, and he would just sit there with his head down all day long. That was it, kind of hiding. One time he was found collapsed. He was unconscious in the street. So the local pub guy, the pub owner, he took him into his hotel and they cleaned him up. They shaved his hair off. It was all you could do with it. They had to scrub him up 2 or 3 times to get him clean. They took all his clothes and cut them off and burnt them. And then they put him in a nice bed. He was still unconscious the whole time. Yeah, he was completely out. And then after some time he woke up and he looked around. He thought he'd died and gone to heaven. And then, they explained to him what had happened. And then he got very angry. Why did you do that? Leave me alone. And then within a couple of months he was back out on the street, filthy, dirty, stinking. Again, that's mode of ignorance. Completely covered over, just hiding himself from anyone and everything. So how can a person, in a similar condition of life, you wouldn't think there's much hope for them. But we had another devotee, Shangana. You know Shangana? From Melbourne. 1974, we got this new building on the South Melbourne coast. Same temple that we have now. So Bhakti Mark came along and he apparently was completely crazy. Not completely, but to a high degree. He was like completely, floating in a space of his own. And he got this affliction where he would click his jaw whilst you were talking to him. So we used to call him lockjaw, because he would talk and click his jaw whilst he's talking, and he couldn't stop. And what had happened to him was that he had taken some datura. I don't know whether you know anything about datura, but it's powerful stuff. It's mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. When Lord Chaitanya was lying on the ground in ecstasy and the Pathan Muslims came, they thought that his companions had poisoned him with datura. So datura is, what's it called, angel's trumpet. Yes, long flower, and the hippies were boiling it up. But it's got some very powerful hallucinogenic something in it. Everybody that I ever met that took datura was completely nuts. There was one guy we had that joined in Sydney, and he was telling me how he'd taken datura, and he was flying in the sky, dancing with trees. I mean, he actually thought it was real, that he'd gone and he embraced a tree, and the tree had taken him up into the sky, and they were dancing in the sky. So it's very, very, very heavy stuff. So, good old back to Mark, he boiled up a whole pot full and drank it. And then he told me how he'd spent 3 days on the south coast in Australia, walking up and down the same stretch of road. He couldn't get off it. He'd walk up and then walk back and walk up and walk back. 3 days he was doing that non-stop. And he finally got into some little disused shack that was there in the middle of nowhere. He went in there and there was this old guy there. So he shared the shack with the old guy for some time. And then he left. Later on he realised there was nobody there, it was a ghost. So some ghost was living in the shack and he was, you know. Anyway, so somehow or another he got himself home. And his parents, you know, were completely shocked. They immediately admitted into the psychiatric ward. There's one, I forget the name of it in Melbourne. So every city has one, Bellevue or this or that, you know. And so he got admitted. He told me that he spent the first couple of weeks floating up and down the wards. He couldn't get back in his body. He was kept going out of his body and floating up and down and trying to get back in again. He forgot how to talk. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't do anything. So they had to teach him everything all over again, how to communicate. Eventually they got him working again, and you know, they let him out. So this was his condition, and then somehow or another he met the devotees, and something clicked, and he became a devotee. And he was way out there. I mean, you know, it was very difficult to kind of engage the guy, but he was sincere, and he would come every day, and so we kept on engaging him, and gradually, you know, he started coming good. He spent 28 years washing the pots for the deities, you know, every single day for 28 years. And when I go to Melbourne, you know, I still see him. He comes around every day. He's got a wife, he's got twin kids. He's still way out there, you know, to all appearances, but he's just got this very powerful attachment to Prabhupada and, you know, to devotional service and the association with the devotees. So there's a classic case there of somebody being in extreme ignorance. I mean, mind's completely scrambled. But somehow or another, by association with the devotees, you know, he was able to actually take up devotional service. He got himself initiated later on, and he's still there, hanging in. So that's the proof of the power of, you know, association with the devotees. It can cut right through, you know, all this ignorance and passion. So, that's in reference to that particular point about whether you can actually surrender or not. And then this last point, where Prabhupada's talking about, you know, we should deal with everybody in a humble way. We should assist others that need to be assisted. We should serve those who are more advanced. This is the position of a devotee. And Gurudas Prabhu. You know, can I brush your shoes? Not Gurudas Prabhu, come and brush my shoes. So that struck a chord with me, that little comment, because when I was a small kid, I was brought up in northern England. There's a town there, iron and steel town. So in the 1950s, it was when the first big migration of Indians was coming into England, you know, after the breakup and independence of India. They got the rights that they could come and stay in England. That was part of the deal for being in the British Commonwealth. So many Indians were coming in, but we'd never seen them. Where I lived, everybody was white. And I don't think I'd never seen anybody that wasn't white. And when I was about 8 years old, my best friend Bob Hornsby, he was living up in the town, they got some new neighbours, and it was an Indian family. They were like, they didn't know how to relate to them because we'd never seen anybody, you know, coloured before. And so to help them to adjust, his father told them a story about how in the Second World War there was actually about 2 million Indian troops in the British Army in the Second World War. They made a huge component of the forces there. But there was still a lot of prejudice. And, you know, the whole British Empire colonial mentality was, you know, we're going there to civilize the Indians. They're uncivilized, we have to give them our culture and educate them, etc. The white man's burden, etc., etc. So there's a lot of prejudice, even though the Indian troops were fighting alongside, you know, the British troops and getting killed and blown up and all the rest of it, but they weren't getting treated on the same level in the camps. So in his regiment, there was this particular guy who was always bullying this particular Indian soldier. and just nasty, you know, just treating him as an inferior, etc. So one day this man woke up, he got out of bed, he went to get his boots. And the first thing that they have to do in the army is, you know, polish up your boots, polish up the brass buckles on your belts and all that, you know, this routine maintenance work that nobody likes to do. So this man had gone to get his boots to polish them. When he picked them up, he saw they were already polished. So he was surprised. Who's polished my boots? So then this Indian soldier that he'd been bullying, he came and he said, I did it. So after that, then apparently the man started crying, and then they became good friends. So he was won over just by the humility of this Indian soldier polishing his boots. So that you know, struck home for me, that analogy that Prabhupada gave there, Guru Das, kind of brush your shoes. Nice way to become a person's friend. All right, so that's a couple of examples. Now, in December of 1976, Prabhupada had been invited to go to Wardha. Wardha is kind of like dead center of India. It's not so far from Nagpur. And it's the place where the Indian Congress Party first started having its meetings, when they were figuring out how to get rid of the British. So Gandhi and all of his associates, they would go there and they would discuss, you know, their political endeavours. So some of the remnants of Gandhi's associates, Vinoba Bhave was one of them. He was considered to be like the inheritor of Gandhi's spiritual mantle, because we wouldn't say that he had a spiritual mantle. But in India, at least, people thought of him as the saintly person, Mahatma Gandhi. What did I just say his name was?
Vinoba Bhave.
Vinoba Bhave, yeah. Vinoba Bhave, he was still alive at this point, and he had requested some of the leading industrialists that were in the Gandhian movement, like Ramakrishna Bajaj, Sriman Narayan and a few others, to do something about what he saw as the deterioration of India's spiritual condition. And he especially suggested that they try to, you know, get people reading the Bhagavad Gita again. Because in post-independence India, they went for this secular approach and they banned any teaching of, you know, religion in the regular schools. So he saw that the young people in India were becoming more and more materialistic. He was especially concerned about the influence of the communists at that time, because India was very close to Russia or the Soviet Union. There were several states in India, Bengal and down south, that were becoming communist, and so there was a bit of a concern about it. So Vinoba Bhave suggested to Ramakrishna Bajaj, that's the same Bajaj you see, the fans, the motorcycles, that family. So he suggested that they have this, what they call a Gita Pratishthan, a Gita Foundation. They invite leaders from all over the country, spiritual leaders, and they have this 2 or 3 day meeting in Wardha, and they discuss how to introduce Bhagavad Gita into the lives of people in India. So Prabhupada, of course, had been invited. He had met Ramakrishna Bajaj in Juhu, so they had some connection. And of course, Prabhupada was the most, you know, well-known preacher of the Gita in the world at that point, so they really wanted him to come. Prabhupada was a bit doubtful, but he thought, because he knew all the attendees are all going to be nonsense. All Mayavadis, none of them are devotees, so what's the point? But then he was thinking that, well, Ramakrishna Bajaj and these other people are very influential, so at least if he can preach to them, you know, he'll convince them and, you know, get them to help with the ISKCON development. So he decided to go. So we had a couple of weeks in Hyderabad at the farm, and there we went from Secunderabad by train directly up to Wardha. and then we were received there by a group of our devotees. Giriraj and a few others had come from Bombay. And then we were taken to Wardha, where there was this guest house. And it was the same guest house where Gandhi and his crew used to stay. Bajaj Wadi, it's called. So they gave Prabhupada the same room that Gandhi had stayed in when he used to live there. Very simple place, very, nice and clean, Sauri. So there was this other fellow there, Swami Chidananda. He was kind of like the other fairly prominent, personality out of all these other groups. He was from the Divine Life Society, and he had been invited as well. So he was staying in the room next to Prabhupada's, and of course he was a Mayavadi. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff around this which I won't get into. But Prabhupada, as usual, was going out for his morning walk. So on the 20th of December then, we'd been there for a day. Prabhupada went for a walk around the grounds of the local college, accompanied by Jagadish, who was Prabhupada's secretary, myself, and a young Indian member of Chidananda's ashram, who had approached Srila Prabhupada and asked if he could accompany us. So Prabhupada asked him about his background. So he said that he was a member of Chidananda's ashram, and he said when he first moved into the ashram, he was always chanting the names of God. Day and night he could do so with no effort, and he always felt enthusiastic. But now he said, even with great effort, it was difficult for him to continue. So he asked Prabhupada, how will it be possible to regain that spontaneity? So Prabhupada told him that it was all dependent on his association. He said, if you live with others who chant, then you can chant. When Prabhupada asked him what went on at the ashram, the boy explained that Chidananda's idea was that everybody should be allowed to come and live there and do whatever attracted them. So some people chant, some people do this kind of yoga, some people do another kind of yoga. Prabhupada said, oh, a hodgepodge. So, he said, because the people you are living with are not bhaktas, they are yogis, then your advancement will be difficult. Yoga means there is some selfish desire. Later in the morning at about 9 a.m. when Prabhupada was taking his massage, he said that it was significant that the boy had come to him for the answers to his questions. He said that means all others are simply bluffers and cheaters. Our men are not going to them for answers, they're perfectly satisfied with Krishna consciousness. So another example then, depending on, even if you're enthusiastic, but if you get in the wrong association, then you'll lose it. You have to be in with the right person, so the combination has to be there. So, and of course for us, the association of Prabhupada was the most important thing. Most devotees, if they were lucky, got to see Prabhupada once a year. He had the whole world to look after, so he had to keep on moving. And there were a few places like London or LA or New York where of course Prabhupada went fairly frequently. But apart from that, most of the other temples hardly ever saw him. So like in Australia, the first time Prabhupada came in was in 1971. He immediately came and installed Radha Gopinath on his first visit. And then after that he would come once a year for 1 week. So we were lucky. We had the chance to get Prabhupada's personal association for 6 years in a row, so it was very nice. But most other devotees didn't get that opportunity. But one place where you could get Prabhupada's association for even longer than a week was in India, because he spent most of his time, in the 70s after he started ISKCON's preaching officially in 1970. Then it took more and more of his own time up to be in India to run the projects in Bombay, in Vrindavan, in